I when I joined the server before anyone talked to me, I peeked in there because I was like, oh, if I'm doing Q&A, but then I realized I probably shouldn't know the questions going in. So, but I don't actually know what any of them are.
Yeah, so if there's anything pertaining, how would I put it, to you, or like, like directly that both of us can answer, I guess I'll go ahead and ask it out. If it's some cursed shit, we might just go ahead and skip it, letting you guys at home know. Why don't we just go ahead and start with an introduction? So, Brady, tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you've studied.
Okay. So, hello, I'm Brady. I went to school with Mr. Psy Ed. Um, let's see. I am really into narrative therapy. That's sort of the main umbrella that I do most of my counseling techniques under. And aside from that, I like to do a lot of creative stuff. I write fiction, I write music, I'm doing some video production, and yeah, just a little bit of everything. My situation is a little chaotic at the moment because I just moved back to the United States from Europe, so yeah, sort of like in a bit of a refresh overall with a lot of things. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much all
It.
there is to know.
And if you guys don't know me, then what the fuck are you doing in the channel? That's that's just straight up like the real point there.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think we've known each other for what, like 3 years now, a little bit over three
yeah,
years.
yeah,
This has been a wild ride. For those
yeah.
of you
It
that,
definitely was.
yeah, it's been a wild ride. We'll put it like that. For those of you that don't know, one, we don't have wizard powers. We're psychologists. We tend to make a lot of assumptions based on the information that we are given at any
Yeah.
time. As much as we wish we had wizard powers, and as much as sometimes I want to believe that Brady does, we don't. So,
Yeah,
uh,
there's a margin of error that crosses between just like guessing out of nowhere and almost wizardry.
yeah, just a little small margin for most people that are like they're wizards. All right, so
Yeah,
why don't we start off? I think this is a really good question for you, Brady. Um,
sure.
so they asked, what makes a good or realistic character in a story?
Okay, yeah, that is a good question. So I would say, when you're trying to make a character, someone who is kind of dynamic, who's obviously there's a distinction I would make between what's a good character and what's a realistic character.
Sure,
Realistic also being relative to whatever setting and genre and that sort of thing. But I would say the best way to make them well-rounded is to make them have different kinds of character conflicts. I would say the balance being you want your character to have an internal conflict, something that is about them personally. Maybe this is like a question they have about their identity, who they're meant to be, what kind of skill set they're supposed to have, what the meaning and value of their life is. So you have you have an internal conflict, something that they're questioning or afraid of or struggling with. Then to have an interpersonal conflict. So this is something between them and someone else, and to have an external conflict. So this is a struggle with their environment or some sort of external force. And so when you have those three things, you have an internal, external, and interpersonal conflict, you give the character room to have things to struggle with. And the best way to make them struggle with it is to make them compromise on one or more of those for the others. For example, if they're struggling with their identity and, they really know that they're meant to be this certain thing, but that to satisfy that thing, it's in the way of an interpersonal conflict. They can't be that thing because of some relationship that they have with
right.
another person in their life. And so you want to give them different kinds of conflicts and then make them have to choose basically where to kind of invest themselves. And that it makes them interesting because it not only makes them a little more well-rounded and believable, but it also gives you a chance to explore how that person deals with compromising things. What is most important to them? Is it most important for them to know who they are? Is it most important for them to fight against some sort of external force or idea? So that's like what I would start with. Basically, always when I'm designing a character is what are those like three main things? Obviously, there are more kinds of character conflict, but that's like the basic building block of any multi-layered character.
Yeah. Let me turn on my ring light while we talk, because I have only one of the three turned on. There we go. No, so I definitely agree with that. I think, having multiple struggles throughout the characters and having, like, if you're going to make a good character, a realistic character in a story is, like, even in real life, for example, we always have issues. Issues pop up left and right. And as you said, we always have to make compromises and we don't get what we want. It's not always like the clear A to B, like, oh, we got there like immediately. No, there's a lot of shit that happens in between each step that gets us to B, and once we get to point B, we're usually like, holy shit, like we're here. And then you see like, oh, see you there.
Exactly. And a story is a story. A character is a character because not everything in their life is going well and not everything in their life is going wrong. If you go too far to either end, you end up with, something that's not very dynamic. And ask yourself that question. What in your life have you noticed, like perhaps an internal conflict you've had that you've had to compromise satisfying with an interpersonal one? And that compromise creates drama, creates a narrative, basically. It creates conditions for the character to do something and to explore their personality and their psyche and all these sorts of things.
So while we're asking this, let me bring up my screen on another side real quick, because I know I have to ask you this since it's going to be hilarious. And it was asked for me to go ahead and do this. But
sure.
I'm going to bring up two pictures for you.
Okay.
Since I know you don't know the characters. I want you to go ahead and just pick out which one you think is the best waifu. And I do have to go ahead and do this because they asked.
Okay.
So let me try and make this big screen for you. If possible, without spoiling myself or others. Alright, so I think I can bring this into the screen. Can you see that?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. So you have this. There you go. Hope you can see that. If not, I'll just full screen it right there for you.
Okay. As your maiden.
Okay.
Some sort.
So that's one. Yeah, her name's Rem. And let me pick up the other one for you. And then we'll go on to the next series question. This is the other one, I guess. You can see that.
Okay.
So one or two. Her name's Amelia. So
when I'm trying to decide which one is the better waifu or the one that
which waifu would you pick? Yeah, which waifu would you pick? It's a simple.
That's a hard question. I don't know anything about their personalities, but just based on their visual design, I don't know. It's a hard thing to say with a quick glance. The like asymmetrical hairstyle of the girl with the blue hair is interesting and perhaps suggests something about her character, whereas the other one is sort of more like at a glimpse might be more obvious what their personality is like. I don't know. That's a hard one. Yeah. I don't want to offend anyone who is beholden to either one of these.
You're trying to be a peacekeeper here.
I'm trying to strike the balance here. That if I go out on a limb and say it's this one or that one, I think there's an angry waifu camp on both sides, and I just don't want to cause that rift.
Yeah. I think that might.
I'm trying to be impartial here.
I think you might have saved yourself a little by saying that.
Yeah. All right. All waifus are great.
So the next serious question is: what is your biggest challenge working as a psychologist?
That's interesting. What would you say yours is?
I think my biggest challenge working as a psychologist is not so much working with individuals, and I think like people might see me bring this up on other points because like I love working with individuals, right? On one-on-one basis, especially adults, it can be a wonderful experience. Sometimes, you know what? I got to be honest. Sometimes it can be boring because there's
Yeah.
really nothing to talk about, and you try and get them to open up, and it's just like a barrier that they have to go ahead and get over. But when you're working as a psychologist, especially for like a community, like event or whatever it may be, they force more so production hours and they do like quality time with the clients, right? So
Mhm.
sometimes you have to see 9 or 10 clients like a day, and like you
Yeah.
just they're just faces at one point, and they're no longer
Yeah.
individuals that have the needs. So that's one of the hardest things that like challenges that you'll face as a psychologist, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Like in the same vein, like, because this is more of like we're talking about the logistics of being a psychologist. I didn't work for an organization. I was doing private practice. So a lot of my challenges were like, you know, running that business by yourself and basically having to maintain it and advertise, source the clients. You deal with your own business's taxes and just like all kinds of logistical difficulties in running a private practice, getting people to show up, getting people to pay you on time, and all those sorts of things. But those are sort of this could be applied to any kind of entrepreneurship.
Right.
So if I'm talking more about challenges in terms of the actual work of a psychologist, I would say that one of the more challenging things, but it's also kind of the point, is there might be an interpretation I can make, or something I could point out to the person I'm working with that will kind of lead them in the right direction. But you kind of have to, in a way, like you know what they need to hear and you know what
Right.
they need to do, but it's not your job as a psychologist to tell them necessarily.
Mm.
Like you're not there to give advice. Like a lot of times people will just say, what should I do? And it is kind of hard to say, like, look, this is not about what I think you should do. This is about figuring out a way for you to develop the skill set so that you know what to do. But I know usually what they want themselves to do, but you kind of have to like lead them in the direction of it, because when they land on it themselves, it's a lot more meaningful to them, and they also feel like they did the work to get there.
Right.
Because if you're just telling someone what to do or giving advice, there's no difference between you as a therapist and what they could get from a friend or a relative. Your friends and your relative can say, oh, I think you should do this, but your psychologist is, I always like to say it's like the relationship here is that the client is driving the car and the psychologist is in the passenger seat with a map. They're the navigator. The client is driving. They're moving in the direction. They're deciding the destination, or we're working on the destination. And it's not about me telling you where to go. It's helping you to figure out how to navigate where to go. So I would say that the challenge is sometimes I do just want to say, you need to do this. It will help. I know because I study this and I know this is what's good for you.
Right.
And sometimes you can, you know, just outright say that. But a lot of times, the most meaningful change comes from asking questions in a way that leads them to where they have, it's like Inception. It's like you have to get them to have the idea.
Don't even get me started on that movie, bro.
But
But you're right.
you do have to lead them down a path through the right questioning so that they construct that meaning, and that is often a challenge because it's not a universal thing. Like the way you engage in that process with one person is going to be different for everyone else and in different circumstances.
So my thing is that's a good clarification that like you're putting out there, right? It's like there's a big difference between being a psychologist or a therapist and being like a life coach, in that regard, right? And it's two very, very different regards. In case, you guys were wondering, because like I have like sort of mentioned this before, there might be life coaching opportunities in the future, not so much as a therapist, but as a life coach, where a life coach can tell you, you know what, these are the steps that most people would take. They'll be very direct with you. And if you wish to take them, that's your call. But like just letting you know, like this is sort of where you can take. They can take therapeutic approaches as well. But a psychologist or like a therapist, we're not going to force you to jump off a cliff or have the aha moment, because that's supposed to be for you. We can lead you to water, but it's up to you if you want to drink. Like that's ultimately the end goal with that. So, follow-up question for you. Another follow-up question. Really good question here. Do you have any tips for someone who cannot let go of something they regret in the past?
Oh, that is an interesting question. I'm trying to think of a way to answer this. It's not going to lead me into like a tangent for the next hour, because of course I do know how to approach that subject, but
Right.
like the question was how to let go of something.
How to let go? Yeah, any tips to let go of something they regret in the past?
So I would say this is about understanding what it means to let something go, and asking yourself the question, why is it important for me to let this go? Why have I given myself this goal? You need to get really into the detail of that and ask, what does it mean for me to let go of something? If this is a regret, perhaps I said something I regret, or I made a decision, I cut someone out of my life that I wish I hadn't, whatever the example is. You have to ask, what does it mean to let go of that? Does it mean to accept that I've done this and accept the consequences of that? Does letting go mean I don't want to think about it anymore? I want to move past the pain from that? Does letting go mean, kind of reaching out to them and making amends? When you understand, because letting go is a phrase, but you need to kind of, I would say, ask yourself what meaning you're looking for in this. Why do you have the goal to let go? And it might seem kind of a simple question to ask, but that's why it's kind of overlooked, right?
Right.
When you understand in better terms what letting go will really do for you, it will kind of give you the path to do that. Because if you can say, well, the reason I'm trying to let go from this is because I carry such an immense emotional weight from it, and I resent the way a relationship has ended because of it. When you can say that out loud, you will know the area that is a sore spot, and you can say, okay, perhaps my understanding of how I operate in relationships, or perhaps my attachment to that person, I might still be attached to them. The reason I regret what I did or what I said is because I still have not accepted the way things ended. You kind of need to expand the sentence from how do I let go of this regret to how do I sort of develop my idea of what I need to do here.
Right.
And that's sort of the summary of, I guess, what I would say is just like a morsel of advice.
So before I answer, let me go ahead and see if I can. Perfect. So I think when it comes to like letting go, especially of the past of something traumatic, one of the biggest things is trying to find out how much value you place on that person, on that event. And it's sort of like rating the value score of that, right? Like how much, for example, how much is that attachment important to you, whether it's a parent, loved one, whatever it may be, and how much do they impact your decisions going forward, or how much did they impact your decisions going forward? One of the hardest things, I think, like being in the here and now and looking back, is like, ah, shit, I could have done this, I could have done something else. Maybe if we talked the conversation differently, things might have implored. And while it sucks to say it, you're here in the here and now. You're like, and starting to come into that realization and that like process of like, what happened in the past had already happened. And the best thing, like, aside from healing, because healing is one of the most important things a person can do, especially from any trauma or any events that like they feel they regret. I think one of the biggest steps that you can take from there is like learn from that healing and learn whether keeping that regret, because sometimes regret is there for a reason, whether or not it's like motivating you to take a different approach or a different whatever. It's completely separate, but it's you as an individual trying to go ahead and learn from that and become a better person off of whatever happened. So it's up to, and I guess this is like my overall conclusion, like how much do you value that relationship or that like that the situation that happened? How much of an impact did it have on you? And also like, what is your end goal with it, right? Where are you trying to go? Where are you trying to move? So that's sort of how I would answer that question, just because it's a little, I don't know, it's tricky to answer without like knowing the full context of it.
Well, I have a little bit addendum to that is, this is a piece of like kind of advice or a kind of interpretation that I use a lot, because it doesn't even require to know the full context to be valuable, which is I always tell people who are either not necessarily stuck in the past, but grappling with something from the past or in the future. I always tell them, and this might be a little more philosophical than psychological, but the mentality that the past is only a memory. The future is just an idea. And the present moment is the only thing that really exists.
Right.
And from that kind of framework, it's a really simple way to think about it, that the past right now, it doesn't exist. It exists as a memory for you and a memory for everyone else. And the way we access it helps us construct meaning. But it is just a memory. The future doesn't exist either. It's just an idea. The moment you're in is the one you're grounded to. And this isn't a phrase that, is meant to make you just like turn into a hedonistic, like, oh, I'll just live in the moment and who cares about the past. It's more about saying, well, the past is a tool for me to understand something, but I don't want to use that tool for every task. And same with ideas about the future. Understanding that the past is just a memory, the future is just an idea, present moment is the only one that really exists, should help you understand that the moment you're in is the one you're in most control of. It's the one that has the most potential for action or changing the situation that you're in. Accessing the past can't necessarily help with that, because it's by definition only a memory, really. Like that's what it is. It doesn't exist. You can't go there. You can't go to the future either. It is just an idea we have about something that hasn't happened yet. So, this kind of mentality can help with moving on, just because it lets you ground yourself in, where am I in the story? Right now, I'm in a moment where I, am moving forward, and I'm trying to understand what those memories mean to me and how to contextualize them and what to do with the pain that exists there. But from one moment to the next, you are no longer in that moment.
So the next questions are, I guess, quick fire for you. Why did you choose to study psychology, and did you ever get too emotionally involved with the client?
Well, the reason I like psychology is, I guess it's because of the framework of what it's doing. And what I mean by framework is, you can you can look at, let's say, a significant event in someone's life, and you can try to understand that event philosophically. You can try to understand that event scientifically. You can apply all kinds of frameworks, mental frameworks to it. You can look linguistically at things. You can look mathematically, and you can look at things psychologically. the reason I like looking at things psychologically is because of the framework being so like kind of dynamic and also multifaceted, because it also, there are lots of different philosophical interpretations, that you can bring. But I do find that psychology is a little more malleable because it's not necessarily rooted in the ideas, the overall ideas. If you're talking about utilitarianism or something, that's a philosophical idea. But psychology is more closely related to the human experience. It's not just heady and conceptual and like broad in the way that like a philosophical idea like nihilism is.
Right.
It doesn't get at the individual experience of a person, and that's what you work with as a psychologist. You talk to one person at a time, sometimes two, about their experience. And I really like how personal that framework can be as a way to understand meaning and for the potential to change someone's circumstances. That's why psychology attracts me.
So I'll be honest, psychology attracts me because it's a good reference point to like trying to figure out like human conditions, the human mind, and all of that. Also, really good for like picking out body language, nonverbal cues. If you're going to start
And
like put
just general wizardry, really.
Yeah, in reality, yes, you're able to do so much stuff with psychology. Whether it's wizardry, whether it's going to a bar and like knowing his meals. We'll get into that story in a bit. Whether like you're actually able to go ahead and like use psychology in terms of like benefiting in social situations, especially if you have social anxiety or any form of trying to understand yourself and better yourself as a human being. So, without going into details, I guess just a simple yes or no answer. Have you ever gotten too emotionally attached to a client? Doesn't mean necessarily like breaking, the psychology code, like our APA code or ethics code, but like, just being emotionally invested in their progress.
Um,
Oh, give me a second. My brother just came in. Go ahead. Sorry. No, you're fine.
I know I'm fine.
Bitch. Oh, sure. All right, you're good.
So my answer is I'm gonna lean towards no. I would say I haven't gotten, like, obviously you're emotionally invested in your clients because you care about them doing well, and I've certainly had clients who are in stronger crises, or perhaps their situation was similar to mine, and so I was able to connect with it more personally. But I wouldn't say I was so affected that I wasn't still like able to do what I needed or to keep the distance that I needed.
Right. So for me, like in terms of being affected by like doing what needs to be done, I would say absolutely not. However, I would say like empathetically available to the point where it made me cry. Yeah. Like there's been one or two clients, especially when it comes to dealing with kids and some of the trauma and stuff that goes through with them, that you're just like, wow, like that really sucks, But other than that, like not really. I wouldn't say I'm like emotionally invested in a client or anything. I am rooting for their success and rooting for their stability, but that doesn't mean that like ethically we're going to violate any rules or anything like that.
No, but I have certainly felt more like sometimes I do feel the pain of working with them because I either grapple with the limits of my role.
Mhm.
I want to be able to do more for them. I had a situation not that long ago where I had two clients who, knew each other and were working on things together, and one of them, did not want to work on it anymore and didn't want to speak to that other client. However, my personal judgments aside, when I asked if I could communicate something to that other person, I can't. In my personal life, I might, say, yeah, like I will talk to them for you. That's like what a friend would do, but that's not the role I'm filling, and it's overstepping a boundary that I have to draw, even if in my personal life I might do something like that. And so it can be a little bit like emotional investment to see that, like, look, I do feel really sorry that I can't do this for you, but I just can't. That's not the role I'm in, and that would be crossing an ethical boundary, and so I can't do that. And having that restraint and that being impartial,
Mhm.
it can be challenging too.
So the next one's a fun one, right? And it's, do you have a story to share about one another? Like a silly, fun story. I have a story to share.
Oh God.
Even though we might be wizards in some realms, we are also humans, and we tend to fuck up and play around and do a lot of silly shit. So we tend to play a lot of ping pong, yeah?
Yeah, we played a lot of ping pong.
We tend, like, if anything, you can call him like a ping pong master for himself, but this is not where the story is going. This story revolves around how, being good psych students and knowing that we passed the limit of drunkenness, we can understand one another.
Yeah.
So I remember one time at a bar, without going too far into details, right? Mr. Brady Wizard Coon here decided that he might have drank a little too much, and he was no longer speaking. He was communicating using just basic sign language.
Using my non-verbals, yeah.
Not even with me, it was with everyone. Like, I remember the doorman, like, security guy was like, "Are you okay?" And you're just like signaling him that, like, everything was
Developing
good.
my own, like, version of sign language.
It was so intricate, so beautiful. So yeah, I guess that's the story I'll share. I won't go further into details, but I will say that is one of my, like, all-time favorite memories from that, like, night.
Yeah.
We've had a lot though.
Yeah, despite, like, how inebriated and non-communicative I was at the time, I do still remember that very vividly.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, maybe it only happens to me, but, like, when you reach a point where you get so intoxicated that, like, right up until that point, you're, like, not aware of anything. I can't remember anything. I'm, like, basically almost just incoherent. But once I reach the point where, like, my body has shut down, my motor functions, and that's like my mind instantly sobers up, and I remember very vividly all those things, but I couldn't do anything about it. Like, I was walking around in a drunk body.
Aside from
My
walking around
story,
naked. Oh, go ahead.
my story
Oh no.
about
Oh, no.
Edgar, about the both of us, I guess, was about the time we went through a fucking time warp.
Ooh, please do tell.
So what happened? Let's see. This starts because I was like, let's go to
Karate
a martial
place.
arts, yeah, a martial arts dojo. I wanted to like, start doing martial arts again in the Netherlands, and I just, like, picked a studio in town that we could walk to, and we're just going to go there for the evening, see what it was like, and then head back. And so we walked there, as you do in the Netherlands. A lot of walking. It's not like the States. You're not really driving around so much.
Context.
At least in
We've
our
been living.
circumstance.
Yeah, context. We had been living there for what, like a year and something, or like a year. So we knew the city like the back of our hands by then. So
I
go
had
ahead.
been living there for 5 years at that
Yeah.
point. So,
Yeah.
like, I know the city very well, because I did my undergrad there for 4 years, and then I also did my master's there. So you had been there for a year. This is my 5th year in this town, and so I know the city very well. And so we set on an adventure. We're completely sober, also.
True.
We can
True.
contextualize this and play a little bit of ping pong first, and then we went. Least remarkable part about it was, like, the actual karate stuff. It was okay. We went and we spent one evening there. We did a little bit of a class. Yeah, it didn't click,
Yeah.
so we left. We left, and we were walking back. And, like, the way this town is laid out is, and most Dutch towns are, like, pretty like uniform. Like you're not like making lots of turns. You're usually just making one or two, because the cities are often kind of like layered in this way that all the streets are sort of parallel. So it's not easy to get lost, I would say. And boy, did we get lost. Somehow we walked the exact same way back, but in reality, we got turned around and almost went to the whole next town over, I believe.
We were at the literally at the entrance point for the next town.
Yeah. And then somehow when we made like the next turn, we basically ended up back like at our dormitory. It was like a mix of like spatial disorientation. We just like we were very sober and clear about where we were going, but it did not make sense for how we ended up there. Like it didn't make sense how we walked for an hour in the wrong direction and then made one turn and ended up back at our house.
See, but to be fair, there was a lot of weird shit that was happening that night. Like me
That's true.
trying to upload to Instagram, like, hey, like, where are we going? And boom, the moment it's uploading, my Instagram just shuts down. Like, my phone
We were
just
trying
dies.
to like record like a little Insta story, like saying that we just went through this weird time warp disorientation thing, and you recorded it, and as soon as you tried to upload it, your phone shut down. When we go back up to the dorms, you plugged your phone in, and it didn't die of battery, it just shut off. It just shut off for no reason, and then the footage we recorded was gone. And then like people around us were like behaving strangely, so like we came up with this theory that we went through a time warp and perhaps ended up in like a the next reality over, where like myself and Edgar were the same, but like everyone we interacted with after that was like a slightly different version, because it was a lot of weird things, like not so strange that you're like completely off your head. It's just like you start noticing these little butterfly effect irregularities. And yeah, that was an interesting night.
That was an interesting night.
So, follow-up question. I guess this is where we start getting serious again.
What do you think about like MBTI, astrology, anagrams, like all of that? Like the Myers-Briggs tests and whatnot.
So I think that if you can develop a framework that helps you understand the world and your place in it and how you should conduct yourself in it, and that framework doesn't harm or influence anyone else, then I'm all for it. I personally think a lot of that stuff is, doesn't have a lot of value. Obviously, psychology is a more scientific, not like the most hardcore or rigid science, but you can apply scientific principles to it. So I'm not into card readings or astrology or these sorts of things, but I do submit that if you have a framework about the world or the way things work, and it doesn't, you're not impacting someone else or trying to convince anyone else to make decisions based on your framework, if it helps you move things along and it gives your life meaning, it's not my place to say I think that's bullshit, so it's
right,
whatever.
So my whole thing is like, for example, and I hated this when I was in the Netherlands, but somehow I still got around it, even at the bar, which is like, oh, you're a Taurus. I'm sorry, I'm a Gemini. And it's like, that don't mean shit. Like, I am sorry. Like, I can be a Taurus and still rock our world. Like, we need to understand that human beings are all different. We all come from different perspectives, have different schemas, have different things that apply to us. With the MBTI, like the Myers-Briggs test and all of that, I don't think that there's enough actual like tests being done on them to understand if they're valid or not. Last I've heard, it's at like its ranges. Like, it's a good for providing like a schema, a frame of work, like work in mind. But at the same time, because we as individuals are so fluid,
Yeah.
like, like one moment we can be introverted, the next moment we can be really extroverted, depending on the circumstances and the situations around us. I think like limiting ourselves to like the schemas that an internet test tries to give you is probably not the greatest thing in the world. However, if it works for you, it works for you. That's
Well, I sort of subscribe to the idea of phenomenology. This is the doctrine that reality is what you experience from it. Now, that's not like a way to just say that, your reality is the only one that exists. What it means is if you go up to someone and say, hey, we're both Geminis, and you have a genuine connection with that person, perhaps you identify, I don't know what Geminis, I don't know the specifics, but let's say it's, we have the same star sign, and that star sign correlates with, we're happier in the summer months than in the winter months. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I'm just using it as an example. If you meet someone and you recognize you have the same star sign and you connect with that person and you develop a relationship with them because of that connection, from the outside looking in, it doesn't matter objectively whether you're really Geminis and whether that scientifically means you're both happier in the summer months. What you experienced from it was real. You experienced a real connection from it, regardless of whether it was, like you can scientifically prove it. So this isn't something you can apply to every developed relationships. Phenomenology is about, reality is more experiential than quantifiable. And so in that's the margin I would say that look, I don't subscribe to these ideas of astrology or whatever else, or the Myers-Briggs. It's not my field of interest, or it's not how I would construct meaning. But it doesn't matter, because if someone made a genuine connection from it and it impacted their life in a certain way, that is a real experience. And if the foundation of it was unscientific, what's the difference? It's purely academic at that point, whether it's, correct or not.
You see, I think that's where the difference lies, right? Because of course you can go ahead and make connections and like build wonderful connections off of that. However, like basing every decision based on something like that can also be a very toxic trait to go.
Well, that's where it gets into, like, I said, if you're influencing yourself or someone else in a harmful or impractical way, then I would maybe step away from it.
Yeah, that's
if you're like making financial decisions based on like whether you're happier in the summer months or not.
To the moon, baby, to the moon.
Because that's what your star sign is. That's where that's where I sort of like back away from that stuff. Someone because you share a star sign, who cares if it's accurate or not?
So, like, I guess continuing off of that, do you consider yourself knowledgeable on something else than psychology?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, what do you consider yourself knowledgeable in?
Well, I bounce around a lot of like creative things, like I write fiction, I compose music, I can do visual arts, I I like to do videography. I like, especially during quarantine, like I've taken to just picking up new skills and trying to get as good as I can at them before I move on to the next thing. So I try not to be like a jack of all trades, master of none, but a lot of times that is what ends up happening. I got very into like color grading my footage for like a month. I just got really like it's all I would do every day is like color grade my footage to make it more cinematic and have more depth in these sorts of things. Do I consider myself an expert at it? No, but I am very knowledgeable about it. I can say that I studied the color science and these sorts of things. Then I got really into doing pixel art for like 3 weeks, and now I could talk about that at length. I'm not a master at it, but areas that I have stuck with for more than just a couple months, like the music, the fiction, visual arts, those are more like my other core interests. And yeah, I could talk about writing fiction for a very long time. In fact, I have, because I used to have a podcast specifically about that.
Right.
Which, if you're ever, just want to hear me talk about fiction, you could go find it somewhere. It's no longer being made, but yeah, like I definitely, I would not put psychology at the top of my like knowledge sphere, but it's also not like like I said, psychology is a framework that I like to use to understand things. So it's not like I would rank writing fiction up here and psychology here, because my fiction writing also is very influenced by the framework of psychology, because understanding people helps me understand how to write characters. I do narrative psychology, so obviously that has a lot of crossover to literature and liberal arts and these sorts of things. So I would say that storytelling and fiction writing is probably, and then maybe music under that is probably my larger knowledge spheres. But definitely I'm getting into videography a lot more. I'm going to be launching a channel somewhat soon,
which will be promoted as hell here. So y'all know that already.
Yeah, I mean, like I'll be around in the server and these sorts of things. You'll get to know me a little more before any of that stuff, but definitely look out for it, because it'll have a lot of crossover to these kinds of discussions and how to apply yourself creatively from a psychological point of view.
So I guess with me, it's like no fucking shock to a majority of you guys. Like, I've done theater for a good little bit. Actually, something you may not know is Brady actually used to be in a play, or actually two of them. Yeah, 2 plays I directed in the Netherlands. Yeah, I think you did great at both of them. I think.
Well, that's the thing is, because I'm like a creative sponge. I want to try it all. And so, Edgar's, a theater director and actor, and he's just like, do you want to be in my play? And I'm like, yeah, I don't act, but I would love to. And so I
he's a natural. He's a natural.
Well, I had a lot of fun doing that. And, if there was no pandemic, I would love to do some more acting. Like, it's so much fun. And writing fiction and understanding character is a somewhat different process, because I'm writing about someone externally. I'm putting knowledge into someone outside of myself, but taking that internally, acting as a character was something I hadn't done a lot of, and so that was so much fun. I didn't know I was going to like acting so much, but it was a really good time.
Yeah, which is like, you went in there and you rocked it. You literally became a character and you continued from there. It was amazing to see.
It helped that one of the characters I played was basically just myself.
Plus it being a little bit of a dick.
Yeah.
He
was a little bit more aggressively me than I actually am, but
yeah, that's one way to put it. My thing is, like, as a director, or like, as someone that actually has a degree in theater as well, and like looking at and stuff, this is why wizards appear as well, right? Because it's like, I'm looking at an anime, at a frame of work, at a video game, right? Which I'm sure that like Brady will also be doing. I'm just assuming that like you're gonna go ahead and start doing some like deep dive on video games as well. Um,
Absolutely.
as you start going in and you start looking at like character motivations and stuff like that, like this is all something, what I do every day for like the anime that we've been seeing is stuff that we did every day for like the characters in a play, which is like, what are the motivations? Where is it going? Who, what, where, why, like how? All of that basic psychology stuff you just pull out and just throw it on screen. But
Mm,
it's wonderful. And, once he has his YouTube up, we'll promote it the hell out of it
yeah.
because you guys should check him out and his thoughts as well, I think. Okay, you ready for the next one? I think you might.
Yes.
This one might go a little bit, I guess, interesting. What is an issue as a psychologist that uh, are expected to be able to solve, but you cannot for whatever reason?
That's a good question. So I think there are a lot of expectations about psychologists that, are sometimes not an issue. A lot of times it's kind of influenced by popular media. People see the portrayal of a psychologist on television, or they have, in their like mental zeitgeist, they have an idea of a psychologist and what they're meant to do and these sorts of things, and the role they're supposed to fulfill, and the skills that they have or expected to have. And so that can come into play. I have definitely had at least one client who was a lot more challenging of my skill set than others. And I don't mean like he didn't think I was a good psychologist, but he I think he was a little frustrated with like what I wasn't able to do for him. Kind of like how I was talking before about, there was a situation where I couldn't overstep certain boundaries due to ethics and these sorts of things. And I've had similar situations that weren't necessarily ethical ones, but it's more about like what you want me to do is not what a psychologist is for.
Right.
Uh, uh, a therapist is a certain kind of resource. You know, and I think a lot of times it's a little frustrating for both parties to kind of grapple with like, yeah, what you're supposed to be doing for that person.
So, yeah, I think one of the hardest things, at least for me, to go ahead and I guess tackle with in terms of being a psychologist or whatever in general is like the expectations. I think that's something that's huge. It's like you're there to try to help them like come to this resolution by themselves. You're not there to solve all of their issues. And number
Like I
two,
said, you're there to help them navigate, but they are driving the vehicle.
yeah. And number two, are parents forcing their kids to go into psychology or go into therapy when the kids aren't ready to make that step. A big thing about going into therapy is you being willing to go into the process. Otherwise, you're bringing up trauma and you're making someone face that trauma that they're not ready to face yet. So I think that this is something, at least in the United States, that really needs to get fixed. That there needs to be a reassurance, at least for anyone under 18, that like, hey, is this something that you want to do? And that it's not being forced upon you by your parent. Because therapy is more than just going in and checking in on your feelings. If there's trauma involved, it can get very chaotic, especially if you're not prepared.
Well, especially for this kind of context, like I said, a psychologist is a certain kind of skill set, a certain kind of tool or resource. And I think what you're talking about is, when a parent puts their child in therapy, what they want is for the psychologist to be a crowbar and to kind of force open, issues that the kid probably does need to process. But that's not the role of a psychologist. The benefits of therapy are that it is collaborative. There's a dynamic, a relationship between client and therapist that is collaborative, and it's not about like being a crowbar to force someone to process something. At a certain level, they do have to be willing to work with you,
Right.
that's not to say that there aren't applications for this. Obviously, court mandated therapy, but this is for a different kind of therapist. That's a whole specialization of itself.
Right.
And so in that sense, it is, not every therapeutic relationship is going to be strictly collaborative, but the kind that is going to benefit a troubled child is not, you're not going to get quick results from just putting him in therapy.
Right.
It's going to require establishing a certain dynamic.
So we'll end part 1 before we take a quick break to get some water or whatever with the final 2 questions, right? The first one's going to be a big one. The second one's going to be a silly one for you.
Okay.
So the first one is life meaningless? Essentially, what purpose do we as humans serve in this world if you remove religion, faith, belief, tradition, streams, and history? Or are we just not the same as other animals who end up like living meaningless lives?
Okay. So my quick answer to that, and this is actually a piece of the discussion I'll be having in my first video on my channel, is I'm a big fan of terror management theory. You know this, of course. It's sort of an idea I have a lot of love for, which is all, it's its own, subject. But the quick answer to that is terror management is informed by this idea that the fear of death is what drives us to do most things. It's why we participate in our culture. It's why we make social connections, and creativity also is an aspect of this framework. That whether it's creating something, whether it's making a connection with someone, that the idea is we are afraid of death, and so every action we take in life is a way to preserve ourselves beyond the individual. So I really like it because they describe, for example, creating things. When you create something, what you're doing is you're creating, you're giving yourself a kind of symbolic immortality.
Mm-hmm.
You're making something that represents you at a particular point in time, an idea you have. It's something that tells the world who you were, and so that's how I see a lot of the meaning in my life, at least, is through, I really like to create things because I feel like I'm not going to be here forever, but
Right.
I can make things that, despite whether I'm around or not, do hold a piece of my identity in them. And so, yes, it's the fear of death that that drives us. If we had an infinite amount of time to do those things, we probably wouldn't do anything. So the fact that life has a limit, that it's transient, is what gives it meaning in the terror management umbrella.
So for me, like my response to this is like, is life meaningless? No, only because of the value that we put on experiences, right? With each interaction, it doesn't matter if there's war history, reliving all of that. Literally just coming up, meeting another creature, an animal, even if it's like a rock, we form attachments with the weirdest stuff out there. And that's because we want to share and create experiences for ourselves. And creating those experiences in a weird way is actually what motivates us and gives us a lot of meaning towards like our place in this universe, our place in who we are if we're satiated enough. And I do agree with terror management theory. I think like the end of life does go ahead and like it kind of motivates a lot of people to go ahead and like start focusing in like, oh, death, but like in reality, like if you focus in and say that you're an immortal being, right? What would give your meaning life in that situation? It would be the experiences that you have and the experiences that you create, or attachments that you create. So that is my simple answer to that one.
Terror management, a quick addendum to that, is so interesting because it's not just about how we construct meaning, but it tries to explain everything. Like it tries to explain, for example, the reason that people have conflict with each other, the reason why cultures have conflict with each other, is that this interplay between your fear of death and the way you achieve a symbolic immortality is if you contribute to your cultural worldview, let's say, in the West, we, the reason we go to work, the reason we have families, the reason we create things, the reason we do most things is to carry on the society, the cultural worldview, this framework that we all decide we live in. However, the presence of another cultural worldview is in contrast to the one we have, just by definition. That if someone else is out there strengthening a cultural worldview of their own, it means ours has more or less value. And so this is why our cultural worldviews compete with each other.
Right.
The more strengthened someone else is, the less symbolically immortal ours is. And so this is why we fight about shit. Like terror management theory is a fucking rabbit hole, and it can explain everything if you go like deep enough into it.
And the last silly question for you is, what is your favorite meme that you've seen on the server so far? And can you reenact what it looks like?
Yeah, it's this one.
Wait for the camera to clear up on my side. Are you talking about this one?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Like I don't know what it is, but I know it's you like reacting to something like a tinfoil hat or something.
Ain't that great? That's when we get into wizard level stuff. But anyway, this is going to be the end of part one. This is going to be a two-parter since you guys left a lot of questions. And we're going to go ahead and just take a quick break, and then we'll be back for the next one. So